If you have a hard time seeing how to factor a trig equation, try replacing your sines or cosines with x's. And so in this case, maybe think of this problem as 2x squared minus x equals 0. And seeing it written like this, we can see that it's not a trinomial, it's not a difference of two squares, but I can factor this with a greatest common factor. Each of those terms have an x in common, so I can take out an x, and what's left over then is 2x minus 1. And so if you can do that, you should be able to factor the original equation with trigonometric functions in it as well. Just either go back and replace your x's with cosines, or looking at the original problem, hopefully it's pretty clear to see that each one of those terms have a cosine in them. So let's go ahead and factor out a cosine of theta, just like we factored out an x, and then what's left over is 2 cosine of theta, and then minus 1. Just replace the x's with cosines and you should be good to go. And so since we have two things that are being multiplied together to equal 0, I know that one of those two factors must be 0. So let's go ahead and split this up. And so I have two equations to now solve, just like we've solved earlier. If you need help solving with these, maybe go back and watch one of our earlier videos. So either cosine of theta is equal to 0, which looking at my trig chart, I see that there's two angles that get me a cosine ratio of 0. That would be pi over 2 and 3 pi over 2. So just take a look at your trig chart and you should find those angles in there. And then I'll solve this other side. It's a little more involved to solve, but shouldn't be too bad if you've been keeping up with what we've been doing this week. So I would want to solve that. Maybe that equation's equal to 0. So I'd want to add 1 over. And I'd also want to divide by 2, so I'm going to do both of those steps at the same time. Add the 1 over and then divide by 2, and so I want to find out what angle gets me a cosine ratio of 1/2. And so this is really no different than how we started this study of solving equations. And so looking in my trig chart, I see that the angle that gets me a cosine ratio of 1/2 is pi over 3. And so that may or may not be an answer. Really, think of that just as a reference angle. This part should be really familiar if you've been keeping up with what we've been doing. And so I want to look for the two quadrants where cosine is going to be positive in, since we have a positive ratio. And so one quadrant is going to be quadrant 1, where everything's positive. And in fact, just measuring that angle then means that pi over 3 is in fact one of the answers. So there's a third answer to this equation. Pi over 3 works. However, there's a second quadrant where cosine's positive. Cosine is also positive in quadrant 4. And so drawing a reference angle of pi over 3 right there, and then remeasuring all the way around this way gets me another answer, a fourth answer of 5 pi over 3. And so there's 4 answers that this equation has. And remember, it actually has probably an infinite number of answers. However, we're only looking between 0 and 2 pi. And so in that interval, those are the only 4 solutions we'll find.